This is TWiT.
Apple total revenue. This was a record.
I just want to take a quick break. Jason's coverage of the quarterlies is the best ever. Like, it is the best of anybody doing it anywhere. I just need to say, it is just, I always open it up. I'm always like, oh, the new one came out. And I just love looking at it. And I feel like I understand it faster, better, everything than any other quarterly reports that anybody else does. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. I was thinking about it last night because I was looking through this for the show, and I was just like, this is really well done. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
Yes,
I swedded the charts.
He sweated the Apple script
automated
charts.
Yes, the whole thing.
It's automated is great, but it's just that you just look at it and you completely grok it the way it's laid out.
Well, and yeah, I think this is actually that's true. The very first place I went, and I think the best analysis was from Jason. A record Q3, right? Yep.
Not the most exciting. I mean, for Apple, right? Apple made more than $20 billion in profit. They had a third quarter record.
This is normally the weakest quarter of the four.
Yeah,
looks like it.
Q3 is usually the worst. So
yeah, I'm looking at the historical. See, this is what the charts are so great. Yeah, every Q3 since 2020 has been the lowest.
It's kind of the low, yeah.
But here's the interesting point: services now 28% of Apple's revenue.
Yeah, more than the Mac, iPad, and wearables categories put together.
Yeah, combined.
Yep.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Now, you say that's cause for concern, and I think I kind of agree with you, especially, it's funny, you said that, you wrote that article in Macworld before the big Google decision, which we'll cover in just a sec.
That was a Six Colors original, by the way. That was not a Macworld article. That was one of my little Friday thoughts that I had about it. The idea that very rapidly Apple's going to be making more profit on services than it is on products. But
you say existential thoughts about Apple's reliance on services.
Well, I think it's worth dwelling on the idea that we think of Apple as a product company, a hardware with bundled software company, and that services they have built up to this thing. Now, I got a lot of people who said, how dare you? And a lot of people who said, see, this is the proof that everything is terrible. Neither of which was my intent. My intent was to say, please notice this and notice how Apple's business has changed, and also think about what it means for their priorities. But I do think that ultimately, unless somebody at Apple really misses the trick, the fact is that all that services revenue stems from products that without the iPhones in people's hands and the Macs on people's tables, the services wouldn't be sellable. I think that it's more just that Apple's composition of Apple's business is very different. And you mentioned the Google thing. It is true, about a quarter of services revenue is their deal with Google. And if that goes away because of the antitrust ruling against Google, I would suspect that Apple will replace some of that with some other revenue stream. But what that stream is, I don't know. Whether that's launching their own search engine and monetizing it with ads, or whether it's making deals with other search engines or some sort of like broader deal. But 8 years ago, it would have been almost all of Apple services revenue, and it's not anymore.
Yeah. Plus Apple and everybody else, including Google, are going to have a number of years to figure that out, because we haven't even learned what the court is going to want as a remedy yet, let alone the results of the appeals process. That's going to take a long, long time. So it's not a big threat. I thought even though services is a much bigger piece of the pie than it ever was, iPhone sales is still like 46%. And that's been usually it just over the past several quarters, it's been kind of hovering around the same level, like just short of 50%. So Apple is still very reliant on iPhone hardware to make its money. There's no end to this process in sight, so it's not as though it seems to be a liability for them. But if there are people that are worried that, well, gee, what happens when the iPhone loses its luster? It's still a problem. Don't seem to be that as worried about it as they were like 7 or 8 years ago. So that's not a big problem for Apple anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be actually more of a problem for Firefox, frankly, that Google is.
Yeah.
Sure. Because Apple has other things. Firefox does not.
It is very funny to ponder the Google thing and wonder. I've been thinking about writing something about this, but you go to that next level, which is like, okay, Google, found to be a monopoly, changes the terms of its deal, maybe invalidates its deal with Apple at some point down the road where Apple's going to need to do something different. Does Apple try to turn that into some other revenue? How could they do that? One of the ways is Apple has had, and this came out in the case, Apple has built its own search engine. It just doesn't use it. We now know about it because Apple Intelligence uses AppleBot Extended, but AppleBot has been there all along. And I think they asked Eddie Q during this trial, and he said, one of the reasons we didn't build a search engine is we're very happy with Google as our partner. So does Apple build a search engine? And if Apple, imagine what happens. Imagine the scenes. If Apple says, guess what? Everybody using iOS and Mac and iPad OS, by default, all those searches are now going to go to Apple Search. And all the ads on that will be sold by our team, and we will make our money that way, get the money rolling in. Well, the moment that happens, if it doesn't happen preemptively, the EU is immediately going to say, oh, Apple's using its monopoly to drive people to search, and they won't necessarily be wrong. So this is the can of worms has cans of worms inside it, right? Like there's so much going on here. I don't know where it's going to go.
I mean, the EU, the US in itself will have a problem with that, because their whole the whole judgment was that specifically search text ads is a business, and Google has created a monopoly on the search text ads business by strengthening its position, and they actually separated it out into two separate things. The judge said, on the one hand, the reason why Google is overwhelmingly the most popular search engine, and if you give people other choices, they won't use them. They'll just switch back to Google search. And the reason for that, the judge actually, I'm only halfway through the doc. It's like 260 pages. But the judge, the doc actually says, and the reason why they got there is not because of unfair business practices, but because they just built an amazing product. And so the judge wanted to make sure he's not saying, we're not punishing Google for making a great product. We're punishing Google for making it impossible for competitors to become the default search engine, all these other products, because of all of these sweetheart deals they've made. So if Apple were to create their own search engine, number one, nobody would use it. Number two, I mean, it would be the first thing that people switch out when they set up a new phone. And secondly, they really couldn't monetize that very well, because again, congratulations, Apple now wants to become a monopoly on its own ad products, on its own search engine. So it's a big problem, and it's not going to unsort itself very quickly.
Yeah, the question is the remedy, right? Like nobody even knows what the proposed remedy might be, and how that might affect, because it could be something that allows Apple to get, I think one way to look at the search stuff is as affiliate revenue, right? Don't think of it as Apple's getting paid off to make Google the default Safari search. Think of it as Apple wants a cut, because it always wants a cut of everything, of searches kicked off by their software. Instead of going to the website and searching, you use their software, and they're like, aha, we were involved, pay us, which is very Apple. But let's say they seek that. They could make a deal with a bunch of different search engines and generate that. Or what if the Google search engine itself is divested from Google, or other search engines are given access to the Google search backend, which is separated from Google in some way. There are so many different potential remedies here that it remains to be seen. But I do think that Apple will make every effort to, get revenue, because it believes that if you do a search in the smart bar of Safari rather than going to google.com, that they are owed part of the revenue that results from that search. Now we can debate whether they are, but there is no doubt that Apple believes they are.
Yeah. No, that's true. There's so many dimensions to this. There are parts of this that seem to benefit Apple, because once again, I'm only halfway through it, but I admire how balanced this finding was. It really seems to the judge seemed to want to head off any argument that they took a reductive approach to this ruling that, Google is a huge company, so therefore they must be guilty of something. No, it was very, very balanced. For one thing, but part of the complaint against them was Microsoft was complaining that Google had agreed to share some of its metrics with Microsoft so that it can also participate in the search ad revenue model in a way that they liked. Microsoft did not get absolutely 100% of they wanted. Basically, Microsoft's position seemed to be, you have to satisfy this terms of this agreement. Everything that we ask you for, you have to give it to us, and you have to develop this product that absolutely works for us. The judge said that no, Google does not have to do that. They don't have to make their platform necessarily open so that all their competitors will be happy coexisting with it. Apple can use that in part of their own antitrust case. For instance, a good part of the government's antitrust case against Apple is, hey, you're not letting competitors access to the hardware features of the Apple Watch. Hey, you're not allowing other payment systems access to the NFC. So now Apple can say, hey, it's not necessarily binding, but they can say, hey, look, in this ruling, this other judge said that we don't necessarily have to allow Garmin to have the same access, other fitness apps to have the same access that we give to our own product. So that's fine. However, there's also parts of it that the Justice Department can use against Apple. So it makes one of the things that I'm still trying to analyze from judicial blogs is that it does seem to, the judge did seem to sort of have a more open opinion of what they should consider control of a market to be. And that breaks a little bit from the traditional tests that have gone back to the 1930s. So that could make things more difficult. Again, the follow-up from this is going to last 4 or 5 or 6 years. I'm certain that Google is going to want to settle this and basically find a compromise that they feel as though they can live with. If it is something as simple as, okay, guess what? Google Search is now its own division within Google, or there's going to be a firewall between the ads business and the search business. They're going to want a settlement that allows them to continue to live, drive, and survive. And I think that's how it's going to end. But the ripple effects is just going to be like the Microsoft case in 2000. I
do think that the Google case is closer to the Microsoft case than the Apple case is, because Google has such a commanding majority of the ad revenue. It's just, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very, very high.
93, I think.
Which is similar to what Microsoft had in the desktop business when this all happened. And so I think that is something that they have to, once you get over 70 or 80%, you really have to pay attention to all of these things in incredible detail. Because anything that you do sways the whole industry at that point. And that's where you get yourself into monopoly issues. That is true. One difference, though, is that the Microsoft case was all about Internet Explorer when there really wasn't a whole lot of competition for browsers. So Microsoft definitely had an opportunity to run the table by packaging Explorer with Microsoft Windows and making sure it was the default everywhere. This is different because there is competition here. There are other search engines, and unfortunately, like I said, as the judge actually said, it's not the reason why people aren't using DuckDuckGo or Bing isn't because of these contracts that Google has made. It's because if you give people a choice, you can basically, when you set up a phone, here's Yandex, here's Bing, here's everything. They will just go to Google every single time. And so I wonder how that's going to affect things. It's a difference. There is a difference when, you do have a commanding part of the market, but it's because you're delivering. You can't get Mountain Dew to compare against Coke or Pepsi. And I think that people want Coke or Pepsi. And I think that unless they're actually forced to do something before this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, I think Google will probably fight it pretty hard, only because the current infrastructure of the federal judiciary system is not really open to creative approaches to law. This is very creative. This is like, it's pretty close to cooking the books. A lot of this is the Department of Justice and the SEC and the FTC have decided we're going to get really aggressive about this, and they're losing a lot because a lot of this is really creative ways of thinking about this, and they're going to, I think Google may change if the Supreme Court structure changed. I think Google might want to settle because they'd be like, I don't know. In the current structure, I think they probably feel like they could take it all the way there. So far, most of the rulings in the Supreme Court would lead you to believe that they would cut this one down pretty quickly, in the current structure. So it just, but 5 years from now, who knows? But I think Google, until that structure changed, I think Google would probably try to take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's going to end in a settlement, I'm pretty sure.
Hey, it's Leo Laporte. If you enjoyed this little snippet of our programming, make sure you check out the full MacBreak Weekly. The link is right down there.